Thank you guys for attending. You are in managing low-cost technology implementations. If you don't mean to be here, you can get up and warm my feelings. Glad you're here, though. A little introduction here. Walter Finnegan is supposed to be putting this presentation on. He's the director of Clover Garden Charter School. So that's his picture. That's as close as we'll get to him today. Mr. Finnegan was in a serious car accident in January and experienced, I guess he got what they call a traumatic brain injury. And it's not as bad as it sounds, but he's had to go through a lot of rehabilitation and that sort of thing. He thought that he'd be able to make it today, but the doctors aren't letting him get back to business until probably after spring break. So he asked me to come in and substitute for him, and so that is what I'm doing. My name is Steve Joyner, and I am senior consultant is my title. I don't like big titles. I own the business, and it's just me and all that stuff. So, you know, like president or CEO or anything like that. I do consulting work. I've worked with Walter for a number of years in 2 different schools that he's been in, and we've implemented technology successfully and on the budget. What we're going to do is we're going to talk today a little bit about a proven approach to implementing technology in your school. The first thing that we're going to do, and this is important, is we're purposely going to take a forest view. We're not going to talk about specific hardware, software, services, vendors, any of that sort of thing. All right. We're not going to focus on details, because details come later after we talk about sort of how you should approach funding in your schools and how you should approach a technology plan. So our goal here is we've got Walter and I put together 17 sort of general principles that should guide you when you're making a technology decision for your school. And hopefully you'll leave here sort of understanding how not to make the wrong decisions and how not to overspend and how not to take your money and spend it in places where you maybe shouldn't spend it, right? And our advice is based on 25 years myself in the technology field, and Walter's been in the education arena for 20 years, and we've successfully done what we're talking about, implementing technology effectively in 2 charter schools. And we have data to back all that stuff up. If you want to see that at some other point, you can talk to me after the presentation. So I'll just jump right in and talk about some guiding principles when you're implementing technology. And the number one guiding principle that you need to think about is knowing the goals that you have set for your school. So this has absolutely nothing to do with technology. If you try to implement technology without understanding what you're trying to accomplish, then you will fail. You'll overspend. So you have to have a strategic plan for your school. You have to have expectations. You need to know where your students need to be, where you want them to be, what you want the performance of your school to be, what kind of education you want to give them. You know, if you're an arts school, that's going to have a whole different impact on your technology decision versus if you are a college prep school, right? The technology implementation, all of our technology implementations should be part of the strategic plan, right? And notice I'm not talking about a technology plan, because that's sort of a different animal, and the way that DPI describes a technology plan is a little different from technology people like me when we think about a technology plan. So I'm not talking about a technology plan, we're talking about a strategic plan. So your technology has to be a part of it, and it has to support that. So if you don't have this, then none of the rest of the stuff really is going to matter. The second thing that you need to think about when you are implementing technology in your school is not to let perceived barriers, like funding, or how long is it going to take us to implement the technology, do not let those things stand in the way of the goals that you've set for your school. So when you are making your strategic plan and you are determining what results you want to get out of your school and figuring out where technology fits into that, don't think, oh, we can never do that because it costs so much money and we'll never have the money to do it. All right? You've got to decide ideally what it is that you want. Come on in. So think big. All right, number 3, get help. This is a huge mistake that I see schools make all the time. And that is they rely on in-house expertise to implement their technology. And while you may have some really smart people in your school or on your board or as parents, unless you have somebody who really understands the entire vision and how to implement a system that that is going to have a huge effect on your school, it is not fair to your staff to ask them to do things that they are not capable of doing. A lot of times what happens is we pick the smartest teacher we know in computers, and that's who gets stuck with the technology program. Sometimes it could be your applications teacher, the teacher who teaches applications. Well, teachers are very good at teaching those applications, and that's their skill. But when you ask them to do things that they can't do, everyone becomes unhappy, and you end up spending more money than you need to spend. Right? And I've seen that happen over and over and over again. What happens is that teacher that is in charge of that becomes frustrated because they're not able to do all of the sort of behind the scenes work. They can fix the computer and they can change out computers and maybe load software and do those sorts of things. But the stuff that happens behind the scenes to make sure that your wireless system works and that you always have internet access and that the email system works and that we can store our files and know that they will always be there and we won't lose them and that sort of thing. That will frustrate that teacher, and it will frustrate the other teachers. Because once you've identified this individual as this is your computer person, and they're not able to accomplish what others expect them to accomplish, they'll hate that person. And they'll think they're terrible, they don't know what they're doing, and it just keeps an unhappy situation for everyone. So it's important that you get help from people who have either done what you're trying to do, another school, ask them to help guide you in what you're trying to do, an outside source, a service vendor, somebody who really knows what it is that you're trying to do. And once you've established your goals and you've set where technology can help in those goals, there may be a place for your staff members to do certain things, right? Because you've got them there, and maybe your computer applications teacher could also have a class of students that act as your help desk. Right? So there's places for everyone to participate according to whatever their skill set is. Right? By way of example, at one of the schools that I worked with, they've got a full-time, highly paid network computer person who's there on staff all the time, and he makes sure all the other stuff works. Okay? He also teaches a class with students that help maintain and manage the system, and that's something the students get to learn, and it's also cheap labor for the school to get the students to help in maintaining that stuff. But they also have a computer applications teacher, but she teaches. Now you can go to another school and there's a Spanish teacher who teaches Spanish, but she used to work in the computer field, right? She is sort of the technology coordinator person, so they don't have a full-time network engineer type person on staff, and they call in someone, maybe once or twice a week or once or twice a month to come in and help with sort of the big things that teacher cannot handle. And that seems to have worked a lot better than sort of having put everything on the Spanish teacher who is there to teach Spanish, not do computers. All right, so get help is number 3. Number 4, technology should be cost effective. It should always be reliable, and you should have a consistent user experience. If you do not have those things in your school, then you need to fix it. Cost effective means we don't just throw money at a problem. We really look at what we're trying to get out of it. Reliable is just like a telephone, right? When you pick up the telephone, you get a dial tone and you think the thing works, and you expect it to work all the time. Your computer should be the same way. You shouldn't have students coming into a computer lab, or if they have their own computers, coming to a classroom, and the teacher spends 15 minutes trying to figure out why they can't get logged in, or why things aren't working like they were an hour ago, or somebody's loaded software on something that prevents it from working correctly, or what have you. And then the consistency in the implementation and user experience is so that everyone understands that when they sit down at this computer that is sitting in this room, I'm getting the same interface, the same interaction that I get when I go into another room and sit down and work on a computer. If I'm a student or more importantly, probably a parent, if you're doing things over the web with your parents, they expect a certain consistency. Otherwise, they get frustrated. And then you should be able to measure the results of your implementation in each of those areas in terms of how much money you've spent to get what you've got, and evaluate whether that was an effective investment. Student performance you should be able to measure student performance as it relates to your technology implementation and customer satisfaction. And if anybody wants to interrupt for a discussion, we've got a small group here, so it's really easy. Feel free to yell out. Number 5, implement technology used in the real world. Schools, for whatever reason, are often looked at as sort of second-class citizens when it comes to implementing technology. There's a lot of, hey, I've got this special thing for a school that will work in a school and all that, and when the student gets out of school and goes to college or goes and gets a job, guess what? They're not faced with the same technology they were using in school. I know there's a lot said about Apple and that sort of thing in the lunch meeting. I'm not specifically talking about hardware or software because there are places where Apple computers may be effective, and there are places where you go, well, wait a minute, if 80% or 90% of the business world is using Microsoft Office, then perhaps we ought to teach our students the Microsoft Office, right? Same thing like, if you're using Google Docs, that's great because it's free, but if a student learns how to use Google Docs, it's unlikely that they're going to go use Google Docs in the workplace. So real world technology, I made that big and bold because that's really, really, really important. Yes?
We're dealing with that right now at our school. We're looking at maybe going Chromebooks rather than laptops. The applications are similar. Google does not do as much as Microsoft does. And we're wondering if the business world might be headed more towards online clouds and networking where you just log into the internet and you can get whatever you need wherever you are. Is that something you think they're headed towards, or you think they're going to stay Microsoft Office based?
Well, Office even has cloud presence. It's
Okay.
very similar to Google Docs,
Okay.
and because they're trying to compete in the same
Mm-hmm.
in the same area.
Mm-hmm.
But the vast majority of businesses are not using anything like Chromebooks or cloud computing and that sort of thing, other than when I log in and maybe use their information systems, like the product information systems or the catalogs or the shipping and that sort of thing. They may be doing some cloud computing there. But for applications like word processing and that sort of thing, I'm not seeing that businesses in large part are doing that. Some of the smaller businesses are experimenting with that, but certainly not your Fortune 500 companies and that sort of thing.
Where do you find the information that what businesses are using?
That's based on my experience.
Okay.
You missed the first part. I've been in the business for about 25 years and try to keep tabs and do a lot of work in the private sector and try to understand sort of what they're doing.
Okay.
So it's just based on experience. And I read a lot of journals and that sort of thing. And everybody gets on a new thing every couple of years, and that's driven by marketing more than by need. So originally computing was essentially cloud computing. What we used to have is a big central computer and everybody had dumb terminals that were connected to it. And they moved away from that. And everything then was like, we're going to do distributed and networks and that sort of thing. Now it's sort of all coming back around. And what businesses are seeing is there are appropriate places to use those sorts of technologies, and there are appropriate places to use the sort of, I want it on my own and I don't want to be connected to something in order to be able to use what I want. Not that the Chromebooks can't do that, but until Chromebooks, have a huge marketplace, then it doesn't make sense for us to, in schools, to do things that they're not doing in the market.
What you might be, I've already said this or are about to, what would you recommend as far as student device?
A one-on-one program.
Well, I'm not going to recommend that in this presentation. Beginning again, I am purposely not talking about specific hardware, specific software, vendors, service providers, any of that stuff. This is more of an overview to give you some guidance on how not to make the wrong decisions.
Just, it's interesting to me because I just came out of another session, and the model that was being shown was in terms of Chromebooks, yeah, being the versatile tool specifically almost designed to do certain applications that more and more schools are getting into.
Right.
So it's like, okay, now I'm getting a little bit, okay, what do you do when experts disagree?
Well, here's the thing in technology that you'll find. You can ask 10 technology people.
On the person. Depends on the person, really.
What you actually want it for.
You can ask 10 technology people how to do something, and they'll give you 10 different ways of doing it. So you have to understand that. The key is you have to look, and we'll get into that, but you'll have to look at and I say as a guiding principle so that you don't mess up
Mhm.
and misspend your money, is you look at what everybody else is doing, right? If the business world, the real world, if they're using Apple Macintosh computers on a daily basis, then you go, well, maybe I want to look at using Apple Macintosh computers, right? If they're using iPads, then when you use, what are they using them for, right? So the technology that you implement in your school should mimic what's happening in the real world, right? And there's another reason for that. Businesses have spent a lot of money on figuring out what's appropriate for whatever purposes. Schools don't have the money to play around with when it comes to doing that.
Exactly.
So we look at what they're doing and we go, that seems to work in the private sector. So I'm going to get the thing that 80% of the people are using.
Especially if I'm preparing students for the future to possibly transition into jobs that will be using that same thing.
Right, and again, it's like I said before, it depends on sort of what your curriculum is based on. If you are a college preparatory school, then what the decisions you make are going to be preparing those kids to go to college. Now, what are they going to face when they go to college? They're going to do, all their classes are going to be online. Right? So you go, how do we prepare them for that? They're going to have a choice. Do I use a Macintosh or do I use a PC-based system?
Right.
So maybe we have both in our schools in that case, depending on sort of what direction you want to go in. So it's just, I'll get into more of that next.
Okay.
All right, number 6, don't let the technology solution dictate how you want to educate your students. All right? How you want to communicate with your parents or how you want to improve productivity in your staff. Right? Don't let the technology run you. Decide what you want to accomplish first. And we talked about strategic planning and where technology comes in. Look for a technology solution that meets what you want to do without compromise. That's how you have to approach it. Otherwise, someone will come in and go, I know this isn't exactly what you wanted, but I have this cart of computers that I'm willing to give you a deal on if you'll just buy these computers. Right? Well, what if those computers don't match up with all the other computers that you're running? Right? That's when you let the technology sort of drive what you're doing rather than you saying, no, I don't want to use that. Microsoft's gotten huge involved in schools because of why? You know why Microsoft's interested in schools?
Major market.
A huge market, right? It's money, right? So they are trying to sell you their product. Now, if their product doesn't exactly fit what you're trying to do, then you need to go, I don't want that, even though, right? So a lot of times people will get things and go, okay, we're going to get this and all of our teachers are going to use it, and then the teachers come back and go, yeah, but it doesn't do whatever. And what we end up doing is we say, well, then we're just not going to do that, since the software won't do it or the computers won't do it. What we've got to do is not make sure we're not in that situation and we understand exactly what it is that we want, and then go shopping for a solution to meet that need without compromise. I mean, really, it's doable these days. Now, 20 years ago, you had to compromise a little bit, but nowadays, it's easy to find ways that exactly do what you want them to do, whether that be online grade books or virtual classrooms or the computers or devices that are in people's hands, whatever they are. You can pretty much dictate what is it that I want to accomplish. All right, number 7. This goes back to the Microsoft thing. Understand what motivates those who offer technology solutions, and make sure that their goals are aligned with yours. So if DPI comes to you and says, we can give you free internet service, you need to ask why. What is your motivation for doing this? Where are the details involved in me figuring out how you're able to offer me free internet service? Okay? Same thing with the salespeople. Now, Apple's been big, by the way, since it began in the education arena. I mean, they saw early on that if they get people hooked in high schools and colleges on their equipment, then those are going to be customers when they get out of high school. They're also big in, because of the technology back in the day, in printing and graphic arts and that sort of thing. So you'll find a lot of Apple computers in newspapers and printing shops, and you'll find them on college campuses because Apple literally gave away a lot of that computer equipment to the colleges
Capture that.
in order to capture the market. I remember when I was in, I don't know, 8th grade, and we got our first Apple II computer, and, you know, it was in our math class, and it was text-based, and, you know, it was the coolest thing since sliced bread, and they spent like $8,000 on that thing. I mean, it was, you know, but Apple understood they were cultivating customers by doing that. And Microsoft understands it, so does Google, so does, you name them, you know, all of them sort of understand what they're doing when they get the kids hooked. It's the same concept as McDonald's Playland. Why does McDonald's have all those Playlands? Well, it's to get the kids to come there, and then they hold the customer for life. So when you are talking to salespeople, or when you are talking to those who would provide a service, or a vendor, or whomever, try to understand what's motivating them and make sure that that aligns with your goals. And it can be a win-win. It may be that the Dell computer that you're buying is perfect for what you want. And of course, the Dell people want to sell you all those computers. So that's a win-win. And as long as you understand that you're making the decision and you're in control of that, not the vendor. All right, number 8. Do not implement the least expensive or the most expensive solution. Look for value as it relates to what you're spending versus the benefit you expect to receive. So how many people love Walmart? I love Walmart. I go to Walmart all the time. I can get whatever cheap I want to there. But my wife really likes Target, right? And I go, well, you're just a snooty Walmart shopper is all you are, because you're going to Target and you think you're getting better, right? Because we go to Target and we see certain things, go, oh, that's nice, and then we compare the pricing, and well, I don't know, right? And then we start to look at value. Well, maybe I'll pay a little bit more because I'm getting something that's a little bit better. But sometimes maybe I'll go, well, I'm going to get this other thing here at Walmart because it doesn't need to be all the bells and whistles that maybe Target would carry. The same thing with your technology. You should look at value. Schools often, and particularly school districts, public school districts, often throw money at problems. And they throw money at technology problems a lot, and they throw a lot of money at it. Yet somehow, with few exceptions, they find it very difficult to succeed in what they're trying to do. I think of a school in Durham County, where the rest of the top money came out. They got $1 million, and they went and bought iPads for everybody. That was a lot of money to spend on iPads for everybody. And I wondered whether they had sat down and went, well, for $500 a device, or $400 or whatever deal they may have gotten, could they perhaps have spent that money a little better than what they spent it on? Did they have the infrastructure to support all the kids having the iPads? Were they able to really take advantage of software and that sort of thing? Then, of course, they brag and all that, and that's more expensive. And I'm not sure that anybody really looked at the value equation. They went, we want to get cool, and we want to get iPads because that's the cool thing now. Everybody's getting iPads. So value is very important. And if somebody comes to you and says, I know it's expensive, but it will do everything that you want it to do, then you need to step back and think real hard about whether that's true or not. And there's no magic bullet either, by the way. Technology is not a magic bullet for anything. You've got to have all the other stuff that we talked about sort of in line before you start spending on technology. And you've got to understand sort of what you're getting, the value of what you're getting. Number 9, training. You have to train your students, teachers, parents in the technology that you implement. Because if you don't, they won't use it. You have to involve and inform them, students, parents, and teachers, in your technology choices and the decision-making process so that they'll be willing participants and they won't fight you all the way with the implementation of whatever it is you're trying to put out there. And they'll actually want to learn how to take advantage of the technology that you've got. So if you're thinking about doing online grade books for your parents to see and your teachers to use, then you really have to go talk to your teachers and go, what do you think about this? I know you're writing in your grade books right now. Let's talk about how we can make this more accessible to parents. And then you have to show your parents, here's how you're going to use the grade book so that you can get sort of the information that you need. Now, my child goes to a charter school, and she's in 10th grade now, and has, we've had online grades since she was in 6th grade. So my wife loves it, right? And what we found was when that was first implemented, the teachers were reluctant to update it on a regular basis, so it wasn't really useful to us as parents. Well, enough parents started looking at it going, you know, I know she took a test on Tuesday and it's Thursday, why isn't the grade in there? I want to see how she did, right? Or did all the homework get turned in or whatever. So as the parents sort of became trained in using the grade book and sort of understanding what they wanted, the teachers then became much more responsive to that, and they found it was a lot easier to put their grades all in the grade book. So I never care with my child about a progress report or a report card or any of that, because I see every day how she's doing. And if she's absent from class, or if she's tardy for a class, I see that too. Now my wife, if she knows she's got a test, will sit on there and check that thing every hour to go, how did we do on the test? So they have to be willing participants, and sometimes it's very difficult. It's easier to do with probably your students and your teachers because you've got a captured audience. It's a lot harder to do with parents, to get them interested enough to come to your training class or whatever. So there's got to be some incentive there. One of the things that we've done is in one-to-one computing environments where all the students are getting computers, when we pass those things out at the beginning of the year, what we tried anyway, was to say students are not getting the computer until the parents attend a session to learn how the computer is supposed to be taken care of and that sort of thing. Now, the vast majority of the parents were okay with that. But you know, there was a few that absolutely refused to go because of their work schedule or because of whatever, that really raised a ruckus over having to do that. But we eventually made accommodations for them and met with them one-on-one whenever it was convenient for them to make sure that they got the information that they needed to understand how they were responsible as well as the student for the use of the computer. So there are things that you can do with parents. You know, if you know that they're all going to be at that first open house or wherever you know that they're all going to attend something, or the vast majority of them will, that's a good time to throw in a little bit of training for them and to introduce new things. All right, number 10, technology decisions should not be made in a vacuum. How many times do you find out that the math department just got whatever, or the history department just got whatever, because they had figured out what they needed for themselves and went to the principal and said, here's what we need, and the principal said, okay, let's go get that, that sounds great. And then the rest of you are going, well, how is that going to integrate with what we're doing over here in English? Man, if we'd have known you were thinking about spending that kind of money to do that thing, maybe we could have added something to that process and benefited everybody instead of just the math department. So technology decisions should be made in the context of how it influences the entire school and the technology program. I talk with other people in the technology business who are sort of responsible for reporting to either superintendents or principals and implementing technology. And the one thing that will frustrate your technology person more than anything is when decisions are made without their input. So what happens is the school superintendent goes over and reads about in whatever magazine, or goes and sees a thing that's working well in another district, says, I'm going to get that, goes and signs the contract, we're going to get that, and then delivers it to the technology person and says, now implement. And the technology guy then goes, but wait a minute, this won't work with what we've got. And then the superintendent, of course, inevitably gets mad at the technology guy and goes, well, you're just not smart enough then, right? I mean, that's sort of the way the conversation goes. So the technology guy is then responsible for implementing something that he had no input on the decision in making that decision. So a good way of handling that is the technology steering committee. So you have your strategic goals, what you're trying to implement, you've looked at sort of where technology fits into that plan, but then really for making those final decisions and getting everyone involved, a steering committee that has representatives as parents on there, students, your teachers, administration, your technology folks. Those folks can all get in the same room and go, what are the expectations? Do we really want to implement this particular technology, and how is it going to benefit? So it's a good check to make sure that all the thought processes have been addressed. All right, like we were talking about earlier, technology use in your school is dictated by your goals and your culture. So just because the other school has a whole lot of iPads doesn't mean iPads are going to work in your school. Or if they have PCs, or if they have Macintoshes, or whatever they've got. Just because they've got smart boards doesn't mean smart boards work in your school. What are you going to use the smart boards for? And how does that work with what your method of teaching is? Number 12. This probably could be applied to anything in the world, really. It's not just technology, right? But you have to hold people accountable. So when the decisions are made, everyone should own the decision, and people should be held accountable, and you should measure and share results. Now, if people understand that you're going to measure the results and share those publicly, it changes how they approach something. They will not take the position that that's not my job. They will work to help see that the entire program is a success. People hate hearing this, but this is true. Opinions and perceptions often matter more than reality. So a technology person doesn't like that particularly, because a technology person will say to you, look, our system runs 24/7 and it's up 99.5% of the time. I'm great. Well, except the 0.5% that it was down was when we were trying to do online EOGs. So your system doesn't work worth a doo-doo. Right? Because even though he could say, well, it's up 99.5% of the time, I am successful, the perceptions and opinions of people are all that really matter when it comes down to that.
It
Right?
goes down to that critical thing.
Exactly. So, yeah, it might work when everybody's asleep and nobody needs it, but that's not helpful to everyone. Also, if you survey your users, you will get their perceptions. And I'm not just talking about do you agree or disagree or rate 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, because everybody comes out at 3s. You know, they always come out in the middle when you do that. You have to ask questions like, you know, are you satisfied with the system the way it's running? Right? Does your computer break? Are you unable to log in? And that might not necessarily be a failure on the part of the equipment or the software. It may be a training issue. Maybe, you know, student doesn't know how to do something. But it's all part of the same thing, because there is a symbiotic relationship between the technology and the people. And we can't just say, here's a technology system, works great, if all of you people using it just would use it right. Right? So if you measure perceptions, and also perceptions in the general public are important. Right? So if others see you're implementing technology, but if the general discussion over Twitter that night is none of this technology ever works, that gets out. Right? The public, your audience, knows about it pretty quickly. So it's really important that even if you think it's working, if the perception is that it's not, then something has to change. So
an open survey might not be the best way to do that in terms of starting it out, trying to get a baseline in terms of where you are and determining where you want to go. Because like you said, if you do open that up, then people automatically form a perception before you even get started.
They will form a perception before you get started based on whatever they think about your school. Anyway, they're going to go.
Right. Yeah, well, some of it you can't help, but in terms of how you would want to start out improving what you do have, you would want to stack the deck against you, you're saying?
That's correct. And what I often tell people is you know, just sort of stop what you're doing. Let's get a measure right now on where everybody is. Let's figure out what the big problems are. And you solve those problems, and it builds confidence in your ability to then introduce something new. And you can find out what new things it is that they would like to do. Right? So you've got multiple components to managing the whole thing. You've got sort of your strategic plan and your board who said, this is what we want to do, this is what our school's about. You've got a steering committee that can sort of help guide you into implementing the technology, and then you've got sort of the general public, you know, your customers, parents, and whoever. All of those put together will help you understand the impact of what your decisions are and if things are working. So it won't be about taking somebody's word for it, yes, it's working, right? It'll be about, I've got data and I know whether it's working or not. And you can even, if you handle it right and if you provide good customer service to the users, I mean the students, the parents, teachers, they will be much more tolerant of failure on a certain level than if you just go, I'm gonna ignore you. Right? They will go, okay, I understand now that you've explained to me why such and such isn't working. And I trust that you're going to fix it, and you tell them when you're gonna fix it, you do that. But they own the decision that way.
Right.
So they're much more likely to look favorably upon what you're doing, even if you're not at the level of success that you'd like to be. Number 13, you can have an awesome technology program at your school that includes one-to-one computing, computers for everybody, and even virtual classes, so something like a Blackboard or Moodle or whatever your choice is, for about 3 to 5% of your revenues. If you're spending more than that, then you are probably overspending. And the percentage goes down as your school gets larger. So if you're in the 300 student range, you're probably going to be closer to the 5%. But if you're in the 1,000 student range, you're going to be much closer to that 3%. So don't let anybody convince you that you have to spend more than that, because you do not.
Okay, like all the way down to kindergarten?
What's that?
All the way down to kindergarten?
Yes, all the way down to
All the
kindergarten.
way down.
Yes. In fact, Mooresville City School District, they talked about a lot there, and there's a lot. I mean, they give them to third graders laptops like Macintosh. So, but yeah, the kindergartners and all that can use the computers. What you do for your elementary school is different from what you're going to do for your high school, just because of how you might approach it. And my experience has been when you give kids computers, you find that the elementary school does great with them. They don't break them, they take care of them, they're important devices to them. And your high school students tend to do well with them. They're a little more careless, but the ones who mess them up are your middle school students.
Well, that's true of everything.
Absolutely. They stick them in the book bag, and then they throw the book bag on the floor, and people kick the book bag around, and nobody thinks about, oh, my computer was, in there, right? But that's where we see the most breakage, and that's what's right there. So,
What is the sort of the best practice now in the school-owned devices and holding the student and their family accountable for that device in terms of damage, lost, stolen, all that kind of stuff?
yeah, I don't know that there's a best practice, but I will tell you what works. If you have to let the parents know that they're going to be responsible for the damage that's done to the computer at the very beginning, and you make them sign the thing and all that
So they
stuff.
just
Right?
sign something acknowledging care and custody of the
Yes.
device.
And what we do is, if the student breaks them, we tell them, it's X dollars. Replace a screen is $100 or whatever. You tore the keyboard, or you spilled Coke on it, or whatever the thing is. What we've done in the past with some schools is limit that first breakage to a certain amount, so the parents know that, hey, even if you destroy the whole computer, you're going to limit whatever
Their liability.
your liability is for it,
Yeah.
right? But we also run into, at the end of the year, when you pick up all the computers, because over the summer, typically you keep the computers and you reinstall software and do all the things, undo all the things the kids did to them over the school year. And what you'll find, and that's when you inspect them and you go, you owe this amount of money. And what we've seen works very well is you don't get it back until the money's paid. And we've also given students, for parents who go, we can't afford to pay the $100 or whatever, we go, fine, your student can work that all through some sort of community service to the school. That gives, and what I hate, I tell you, I can't stand to see, is the students who break their computers and mom writes a check and it's done, right? Because I think personally that there ought to be community service and paying for it if it's something that's, that kid did this just being dumb or purposely or whatever. But
So you see work crews moving around the school, working off their computer charges.
you do, they'll go out and do the landscaping or whatever. I mean, as a charter school, we need volunteers, so, and kids are great for doing that kind of stuff. We've had them help do whatever, work in the dining hall or, work in the library or what have you. But it gives them some skin in the game, and they understand there's a consequence to not taking care of everything. So, but that's basically what you do. They sign something, and like I said, we did parent meetings 1 year when we brought everybody in, and that was tough because of how much time it took to get the parents of 500 or 600 kids in over a period of time. And then the following year, we prepared a video instead that we posted on YouTube and we put on the computers, and we sent papers home and said, by signing this, you've watched the video. You swear that you have. You know, they don't. I mean, but you've given them the opportunity to understand sort of what the consequences are, and as long as they're notified. Now, I've seen some schools that right off the top go, you're going to pay what essentially works out to a lab fee, but it's an insurance fee. You're going to have a hard time doing that in a charter school.
Yeah, I don't think that doesn't pass muster, does it?
Well, it depends. If the district is charging a similar fee, then you can charge the same fee.
Oh, okay.
But they're not, right? I mean, most districts aren't doing this. I know the Mooresville School District, they are charging a $25 or $50 fee or something annually. That covers what they call insurance for the equipment. So that's another approach that could be taken, but it gets a little more complicated at that point of keeping track of stuff. I mean, you gotta go, did you pay, did you not, and all that. The best thing is just, I'm not giving you the computer back, and I've had kids sit there and swear to me and tell me their mama ain't gonna pay, and when the kids comes back to school and everybody's got their computer and that kid's having to sit there with pencil and paper and write stuff down, they come up with the money somehow. I mean, it just,
Funny thing.
yeah, they just are able to do it, and the ones who swore they'd never pay it, they do. So, and if you price the repairs on things appropriately, then some of that, the ones that aren't paying, I mean, you don't tell them this, but some of that cost is subsidized by, well, we've built in a pad on all the repairs. So maybe it costs us $80 to fix a screen, so we're going to charge $90 to fix the screen. And then you've got a little extra. So what we've seen is that tends to balance itself out, over the long term. And they're going to break them. I mean, you probably have 15% of them get broken over a year, or 20, depending on if you've got middle school. All right, number 14, budget money for maintenance and replacement of equipment. Don't let your technology get old. So just like a car, your maintenance costs increase as your equipment ages. What I will tell boards when they're doing their budgeting is that 3 or 5% or whatever number that they've decided, you just put that away in a separate fund, an accounting fund. Put that away, and if you don't spend the whole thing, leave it there, because you may spend it the next year. But if you continue to put that in, then you can budget out your technology expenses multiple years, because you'll have a fund that's is going to be funded at a certain amount, and you can start planning. Well, I know these computers have to be replaced after 3 years or 4 years or whatever the time frame is. So make sure that gets done. There's so many schools that I walk into where they're using 10-year-old laptops and trying to make the best of it, and they might as well just throw the things away because of the trouble that it causes when they try to do that. And what we found with student use computers is that they can use them about 4 years before they're just totally beat to death. About 4 years. And then all your infrastructure stuff, there's time, different amounts of time that you apply to each equipment, each piece of equipment, depending on what that equipment is. So certain things will last 10 years, and certain things will last 3 years, and you just have to sort of know that and make sure that you're able to budget that. So, after you implement everything that you all the technology, sort of that you go, this is where we want to be, you should still be putting money in that fund, because in a couple of years you're going to have to spend significant sums of money to start replacing things. So this is important not to forget, because once you do this, once you implement technology, and it doesn't matter whether it's smart boards or whatever, there's the bulbs go out or whatever. If you buy this stuff and it breaks and you do not fix it or replace it, then you've wasted all of that money, and everyone will perceive that you've wasted that money, because they're going to walk in there and go, "You spent $4,000 on a smart board and it's just sitting there, not doing anything." Never buy version 1 of anything. Do not be the guinea pig. Don't buy the latest and greatest thing just because that's the latest and greatest thing until you've seen it used somewhere else. Businesses have often made this mistake, and schools usually make the similar mistake. And that is the salesman comes in and goes, well, we've got a brand new version of whatever that has come out. Don't you want that because it's got all these new features? And of course the salesman is motivated to sell you their new version. And if you go, well, no, I don't want that version. I want the one that I saw work. I don't want the one that's not going to work. I mean, it took me having an iPhone, love my iPhone. It took me several years before I bought an iPhone because I wasn't going to buy an iPhone 1. I eventually bought an iPhone 4. And the kids all told me, well, why don't you do 5 is coming out whenever, right, in a month or whatever. Why don't you get that one? Because I don't know how that one's going to be. The 4's been out for like a year and a half, and it works great.
Plus you can get a 4 for $100.
Well, at the time you couldn't, but yeah, you can get it free now.
Yeah.
The 4S you have to pay maybe $100 for.
No, it's 100 for OS.
What's that?
It's 100 for OS.
100 for a 4S.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think the 4s are free now. But
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not going to get it because I don't know what the experience will be with it.
That's what I always told my kids. I said, just wait till the next one comes out, and we'll get you the one the year before.
And you know, it's like cars. You know, do you buy the first year model of the first new car that the first manufacturer first makes? No, you wait, because they're going to have so many recalls, and they'll have that stuff worked out on version 2 or 3. And same thing with software and hardware, and that's what particularly with software. If somebody's done something well and in a certain environment, and then they go, well, we're going to revamp all of our software, but sell it as the same thing, just better. If they've done a complete rewrite of that software, they're going to have problems. I mean, it doesn't matter how big the company is. I mean, think about Microsoft and Vista. Right? Windows Vista was a perfect example of, really, if you moved from XP and you went and bought Vista, you probably regretted that decision. When Windows 7 came out, now they had all the bugs worked out at that point, so Windows 7 was great. And everybody likes to forget about having ever purchased Vista or ever made Vista. All right? And seeing the results of the investment that somebody else has made, is like what I said earlier, private businesses are able to experiment. Right? They are able to do that because they have a profit motivation in being one up on the next guy. You don't have that same profit motivation. And you don't have the money to waste on something that doesn't work or potentially won't work. Number 16, once you have developed a well thought out plan for your technology implementation, stay with it. Walter would, he doesn't like this slide, by the way, Walter Bennigan, it's not here. Because he wants to try to change things sort of in the middle of what we're doing all the time. While he understands why we don't want to do that, he hears about, well, I want to do this new thing and I want to do this. It's like, well, that's not what you said, and we haven't planned for that. So what we need to do is let's finish what we're doing in implementing whatever we're implementing, and we will then go back and address this particular thing that you want. Because if you change this stuff in the middle, it delays your project, so you can delay it so it never gets done. You have reliability issues often, and you have confused users, because what you've done is you sort of changed what they were expecting. So, and I underlined this because I can't harp back to that enough about how important it is to make sure that you've got a good plan before you ever start, and you understand your goals and your expectations. If it's not well thought out, then this won't matter. You're going to have to change the plan if it's not well thought out. All right, the last one. This is more a public relations issue than it is anything. Tell them what you're going to do. Once you've thought it out, you tell everybody, go sing the praises, get the coverage in the newspaper and in the TV station or whatever, right? You go sing what you're going to do. Then you have to do it. This is really, really important after you've said you're going to do it. And then people forget often to tell them that you did it. Now, if you are in a county where you've got a school district that isn't doing a whole lot with technology, and you come up as a school and go, guess what we're going to do? We're going to give all of our students computers. We're going to invest in technology. We're going to, all these bells and whistles. We're going to do all of this stuff with technology, and it's out there. Then you better make sure that you do it and it's done correctly. And then you need to tell everybody in that community that you did it, because you will get people knocking at your door to come into your school, more probably than you already have, right? If you've got a waiting list of 100 people, you may go to 200, right? You're going to generate buzz in the community, and technology, well implemented, is a huge marketing tool for your school, particularly if you're in a district where they're not doing the same kind of technology implementation. You'll be able to show those guys up yet again. And in fact, what you do is inadvertently, you will do what charter schools were meant to do, which was to experiment and then take what we've learned and apply them to all the other public schools, right? And everybody knows that's not really happening. But you will sort of force them to up their game a little bit. Because if they're not going to want to hear how great your school is because you've been able to implement all this technology and it didn't require some huge amount of money and I didn't need to get some special grant or funding from whoever, like we just did it. They will then go, me too, me too, me too, and they will start implementing that. And I've seen that in a couple of districts as well. So you'll raise the bar for everyone. So you always have to sort of stay a little bit on top of that. And that's going to be more and more important. Now, I saw that Pat McCrory was proposing that some of that race to the top money be allowed to allow the schools to spend that on what they want, like technology, instead of going, it's going to be on certain things. And June Atkinson, the state school superintendent, said, well, that's only 5% of our budget. So that's not nearly as much as we need to invest in technology, right? Well, I know for a fact it can be done between 3 and 5% of your revenue. So what you're seeing is those guys are going to probably get more money. And if they want to implement technology, they're going to start spending money on implementing technology. And what you don't want them to do is leave you behind, so that it's sort of reversed, where they're doing all the technology innovations and you're sitting there going, well, no, we don't do any of that fancy stuff, right? Technology is not, I think I said before, it's not a magic bullet, and it's not a substitute for having good teachers and parent involvement and that sort of thing. But it can absolutely, if you've got good teachers and you want more parent involvement, technology will help you achieve those goals. All right, then in conclusion, technology implementations are notorious for being over budget and late in delivery. I mean, everybody knows that. In the private sector, the public sector, it doesn't matter. Everybody knows when somebody comes out and says, well, we're going to do it in this amount of time, it's going to cost this amount of money. They never meet those goals. It's just notorious for that. So you have to be better than that. And what we find is that a lot of public schools have not demonstrated an aptitude for implementing technology successfully. And I think, personally, this is a personal opinion here, it requires a customer focus. And when you're the only game in town, you don't have to focus on customers. We know as charter schools, we have to focus on customers because parents can pull their kids and their money out of our school. So if they've been the only game in town and they don't understand sort of customer focus, they will buy the stuff, throw it out there, and then expect everybody to use it. And when you go into a lot of those schools, you find a lot of stuff not being used. That's all I have. Any other questions?